self-compassion today. Um, so let's start by having a think about what is acceptance. Well, we know that acceptance of pain and your relationship with pain can have a really big impact on how you manage it. So that's why we have some time today to have a think about this. What are the consequences if we're not able to accept our pain condition? Well, we can find ourselves stuck between two difficulties. The first is that we end up fighting with our pain. And what that leads to is our nervous system ramping up. Often we're in a state of stress, and actually that can often serve to worsen our pain condition. Fighting our pain might look like constantly searching for the next cure, spending lots of time on Google. It might look like self-blame. And if we think about pacing that we've covered before, often fighting with chronic pain can lead to overdoing it, and kind of more likely to fall into flare-ups as a result. On the other kind of extreme, we have resignation. So what happens when we don't accept and we're resigned to our pain is that we can kind of feel this sense of hopelessness. And often that has a really strong knock-on effect to our mood, resulting in low mood. We often end up avoiding activities and we're kind of spending life on pause. It feels like life can be reduced and we're kind of waiting until pain goes away before we begin life again. And either way, whether we're kind of fighting our pain or whether we're resigned to it, can really make it difficult to actually self-manage pain, and to feel any sense of hope. So when I say the word acceptance, that can be quite an emotive kind of idea for people, and often it can be misunderstood as meaning kind of giving up or giving into our pain. But I want to be really clear here that acceptance is not giving up. It's not even liking the pain, and it's not necessarily stopping treatments. What it is acknowledging the reality of it without fighting it. It is a process. We'll come back to that idea in a few slides' time. And it's about choosing actions based on what's important to you, what you want life to look like, and not your symptoms and not your pain. So it's putting your values back in control rather than your pain. And what we want to be doing is making space for both life and pain. So it's basically the idea of saying to yourself, this really sucks, but I'm still going to build a life that matters. So chronic pain can often be associated with this struggle to remove pain or suffering caused by pain. And it can be easy to get stuck in that, focusing on trying to get rid of pain rather than focusing on life and what life is about and what's important to you. And so it can be very difficult to move on while you're also fighting with that chronic pain. So acceptance is about dropping that fight, dropping that struggle with our pain, still acknowledging that it's there and that it's difficult, but kind of focusing on living life. So I mentioned this idea of it being a process. So acceptance isn't a one-time achievement, it's a moving process. And the goal isn't about kind of spending 100% of our time in this active acceptance box, but it's about recognizing when we're swinging and responding to that with kindness, with understanding, and not judgment. So that idea of the fighting or the resignation, we want to be noticing that in ourselves and recognizing it and being able to do something about it in response. So when I talk about resistance, it's kind of this idea of I can beat this, I'm going to push through, I'm gonna go all in. And often that leads to people feeling angry, demoralized, stressed. Often it can result in more flare-ups, and kind of increased pain. And then it can kind of swing to the other side and we get this resignation. I'm never going to get better. It's always going to be like this. And then that, as I said earlier, that can lead to low mood and a sense of hopelessness. So what we're looking for is this kind of middle ground, this active acceptance. So something like this is tricky, but I can manage it. I have the tools to help me to manage this pain. And hopefully this leads to more hope for the future. So as I said, the goal isn't to freeze this pendulum on acceptance, but to just notice when it is swinging and respond with kindness. So I wonder for you at the moment where you tend to sit. Are you more in the resistance, more in the resignation? Or do you feel there's a kind of element of acceptance there? Sometimes people find that there's kind of aspects of the condition that they are able to accept, but other aspects that they find really difficult to. So it's a complex topic, and it's unlikely that you're sitting in one of those boxes. The chances are that you kind of see elements of all of them in yourself. So this is a YouTube video that we sometimes find helpful. Um, Sorry about the sound. Sometimes find helpful to show people as a way of as an analogy for understanding acceptance. So I would encourage you to have a look on YouTube. It's called the Unwelcome Party Guest, and it can be quite a useful way of kind of seeing what can happen if we're focusing our time and energy on fighting the pain. So if you kind of pause the video, go and watch that video. Sorry, pause the presentation here, go and watch that video and then come back. So if you've watched that video now, what I want you to think about is firstly, who is Brian? What is Brian? Obviously, hopefully it was clear that Brian kind of represents your pain. And so I want to have a think about in what ways has focusing your time and energy on trying to get rid of Brian or on fighting pain, how has that interfered with your ability to live life the way that you want to? Again, you might want to pause the video and kind of make some notes there about sort of thinking about, what has been the cost of fighting with pain, the cost of not accepting it in your life. So we know in that video that when he kind of constantly tried to fight with Brian and tried to get rid of it, he did manage to get rid of it, didn't he? By basically waiting at the door to stop Brian from getting back in. But the result of that was that he was missing out on the party. And actually, once he was able to accept Brian at the party, he found he was able to still enjoy it. It doesn't mean that he still wanted Brian to go. In an ideal world, he would have rather Brian wasn't there. But actually, he found a way of managing the situation so that he could still get some enjoyment out of that party. And I guess what we're thinking about is how might that relate to your pain? Another way of looking at acceptance is this serenity prayer. So this doesn't need to be a religious thing for people, but it's just quite a helpful saying. So the phrase is, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. So what might that look like for someone in pain? I guess it's about thinking about what are the things that you can control and what are the things that you can't control. So we know, for example, we can't control the existence of the pain. That's why you're here on this program. You can't control the diagnosis. You can't control the past. We can't control other people's reactions or other people's responses to us. We can't control flare-ups sometimes, but there are things that we can control. So we can control pacing. We can control movement. We can control the boundaries that we set with people and the way that we are with them. We can control the way that we talk to ourselves, and that's something that we will come back to in a little bit. We can control how we spend our energy and what we say yes or no to. So acceptance really is about working out what we can't control, what we can control, and understanding and having the wisdom to know the difference. So again, have a think about what are the things that we are actually, or you actually are trying to control that aren't controllable? And again, how much energy is that wasting for you? How much stress is that creating? So to summarize there, acceptance enables us to stop fighting the pain and instead focusing our energy and time on doing life enriching things. So if we're able to accept our pain condition, we won't be spending so much time and energy and stress on trying to fight with it, but actually thinking about How can I get on with the job of living the way I want life to be? How can I accept Brian into the party in a way that I can still enjoy myself? And it's very much an ongoing process. It's a moving process. And I want kind of you to learn to start to recognize when you might be fighting, when you might be resigned, and when you might be accepting, and what are the consequences of those. And responding in a compassionate way. So we know it's completely normal process. We recognize that that is to be expected with any chronic condition like chronic pain. So it's not about judging yourself if you are kind of in that fighting mode, or in that resignation mode, but to really just manage your response to that and recognize that that is normal and to be expected. So what might help us to accept um, is self-compassion. So how we're responding and how we're kind of dealing with ourselves. What do we mean by self-compassion? Well, the self-compassion kind of literature talks about it in three aspects. So there's self-kindness, which is being loving towards yourself. There's common humanity, which just means that recognizing that everyone suffers and that you're not alone in your suffering. And then there's mindfulness. So noticing your struggle, feeling it, not necessarily reacting to it, but just noticing that it's there and not judging yourself for it. There's quite an interesting website. So the selfcompassion.org website, I've put the link down the bottom there, has got lots of really interesting resources on it. But one of the things that can be quite enlightening is there's a self-compassion test on there, which is a multiple choice test. Have a go at that. You could pause the video here and click on that and go and have a go at filling that in. And it gives you a bit of a sense of how self-compassionate or how self-critical you actually are. So why are we talking about self-compassion in terms of in an acceptance talk? Well, the idea really is that self-compassion helps to reduce the shame and self-blame that can block acceptance. So a lot of people with chronic pain carry thoughts like, I should be coping better, I'm weak, I'm a burden. And those thoughts create resistance to managing pain. For example, if you're kind of having that thought, I'm a burden, you're much less likely to ask for help. And actually, there might be times when you need to ask for help to manage your pain. So self-compassion shifts the tone to, this is hard, but I'm doing the best I can. So self-compassion calms the nervous system. So it's about soothing rather than threat, and shifting the way you're speaking to yourself so that you can manage your pain. So I want to kind of have a go at an exercise now, to help you to think about kind of whether you are self-compassionate or self-critical at the moment. So I want you to think back to a recent occasion when you were critical of yourself and your efforts. So think about something kind of a situation over the last week or so when you might have been a bit critical of yourself. Once you're able to bring a situation to mind, I want you to imagine the self-critical part of you was a person. So if that self-critical thought, if those self-critical thoughts took on the appearance of an actual person, what would that person look like? What would that person's facial expression be? Are they physically big or small in comparison to you? What's that person's tone of voice like? What's their posture or their body like? What emotions is this person directing towards you? Does this person remind you of anyone? Okay, so having gone through each of those questions, I wonder what you've discovered. Often we find with the kind of the emotions that come up with the self-critical part of ourselves can often be kind of quite angry, kind of a sense of frustration or contempt. Sometimes they can be like a figure that's sort of looming large, or it might be like a little gremlin that wags its finger in kind of constant disapproval. And often it's quite hostile. Sometimes that exercise can also evoke memories of a particular person from the past, someone who was particularly critical of you or your efforts. And I wonder, kind of on reflection of what that exercise did, like, did you notice kind of how much of a bully your self-critical person resembles? The way it's speaking to you. If that was a child that came and said someone was speaking to them like that, you probably would say that that was a bully. So isn't it interesting that that's the way we speak to ourselves? And again, I kind of think back to that threat system. How kind of threatening did that person come across to you? Certainly not soothing. So now thinking about that self-critical voice that we often have, I wonder what would be your biggest concern about giving that up, about stopping that self-criticism? What do you feel might happen if you let that go? Now, a lot of the time when I ask that question in group, two themes come up. The first theme that comes up is that people feel if they were to drop their self-criticism, then they would have no motivation, nothing to motivate themselves. Like the self-critical voice is the kind of kick up the butt that they need. Um, and again, I just kind of wonder if you think back to the teachers or sort of coaches or instructors that you've had growing up, what they're like with you. What were they like with you? Were they people that were incredibly self-critical, or actually did you find the people that were most motivating were the ones that were kind? And I wonder again, if you were to kind of try and motivate someone else to do something, would it be through criticism? Something to kind of think about. And the second fear people often have about dropping their self-criticism is this idea that if I don't, I want to be criticizing myself before anyone else does. It's almost like a protection or a defense mechanism. So the fear is that if I don't criticize myself, someone else will criticize me. And again, I kind of question at this point, who is it that you're worrying will criticize you? Um, how true is that if you were to drop your self-criticism, other people would do it for you? So what we want to start to think about is how can we work on re sort of dropping the self-critical voice and bringing some more self-compassion into the way that you speak to yourself. So there's a different sort of various strategies that we can try to think about this. The first one, I would kind of challenge you to think about how you would treat a friend in this situation. What might you say to a friend? If that's difficult, you could also think about what might um, I or other kind of professionals in your group, what might they say to you? You could try phrases like, "This hurts, but it's okay to feel upset. I'm allowed to feel what I feel. Anyone in my situation would find this difficult." It's that kind of compassionate self-talk, that third point. It's really about validating your experience, not dismissing it, and not dismissing the way that you're coping with it either. So thinking about compassionate self-talk, how might you treat a friend, or how might a friend treat how um would you treat a friend? Other ways to work on self-compassion are about acts of kindness towards yourself. How could you be a little bit kinder towards you in the next week? It might be allowing yourself to have breaks. It might be, yeah, treating yourself to something. It might be about setting a boundary with somebody, trying out saying no. or asking for help. One technique that is often used in self-compassionate therapy is called compassionate letter writing, and if that's something of interest, you can Google that. There's lots of ideas that can come up um, of how you might go about writing a letter. The idea is that you write a letter to yourself that's kind of that uses a lot of self-kindness, and it's something you can then use when you're particularly struggling to remind yourself how to be kind to yourself. And if language is quite difficult, you're kind of not sure, yeah, how to even speak to yourself in terms of being self-compassionate, a really simple and actually scientifically backed kind of way of showing yourself self-compassion is through self-compassionate touch. So just putting a hand on your chest, for example, or holding your hand like this, or hugging yourself. Those can be really soothing for your system. Okay, we're going to have a go at a self-compassion meditation now. So I want you to have a think about a situation in your life that's difficult. You can shut your eyes for this exercise. You don't need to follow along the slides. Kind of put things down, get comfortable, and shut your eyes. And I want you to think about a situation that's been difficult recently, that's been causing you some stress. Nothing too kind of difficult. Try and keep yourself safe during this exercise. So just something that's causing you some stress. Call the situation to mind and see if you can actually feel that stress and emotional discomfort in your body. What does that feel like at the moment? And now I want you to say to yourself, this is a moment of suffering. This hurts. This is stress. And now say to yourself, suffering is a part of life. That's common humanity. So other people have felt this way. Other people feel this way right now. I'm not alone. We all have struggles in our lives. Now put your hands over your heart and feel the warmth of your hands and the gentle touch of your hand on your chest. And say to yourself, may I be kind to myself. You could ask yourself, what do I need to hear right now to express kindness to myself? Is there a phrase that speaks to you in your particular situation, such as, may I give myself the compassion that I need? May I learn to accept myself as I am? May I forgive myself? May I be strong? May I be patient? Just think about what you need to hear right now to express kindness to yourself about this stressful situation. May I be kind to myself. And just notice whether giving yourself that self-compassion, whether that's had an impact on how your body is feeling in terms of that stress and emotional discomfort. Try to relax into it. When you feel ready, you can open your eyes again. So that practice is about using those three aspects of self-compassion that we mentioned earlier, the self-kindness, common humanity, and then mindfulness. So being in the moment with your thoughts and your feelings and how you are. So I hope that's something that you found soothing and maybe perhaps something you could practice this week. So remember, expect it to feel weird at first to be self-compassionate. As we've talked about, changes can feel funny for our system, and this is no different. It's going to feel a bit odd. It can sometimes feel a bit cringy. So we expect that that is normal when we're trying out new things. And also remember that self-compassion is not about self-pity. It's not about wallowing, but it's about being there and being kind to ourselves, validating our experience. So I hope you found that session helpful. So again, go away and have a think about where you are in terms of your acceptance, what impact it's having on yourself and on how you're managing pain. Think about how we can work on that with some more self-compassion, and try out some of those exercises that we've introduced today. Okay, thank you very much for listening.